Hello. Yeah. Hello, everyone. By my count, we are. Yeah. By my count, we are all here. And I'll just ask a question, because it's one thing to be chair of the local planning committee. It's another thing to be the recipient of things. Were you satisfied with our region's presentation of the Reformation Service? And that's important because it's not about me or UCJCI, it's about us in community. And the effort that we made was to bring the Reformation Service into a local context, that you could feel the energy that we feel when we sing in our church. And so we hope that that resonated for you and that you felt a part of the CANAAC region. It seems there are many occasions when I'm supposed to say welcome. And so it's not really just welcome, but it really now is a transition from a number of events into what essentially is the first session, the opening session of our General Assembly. And when we start tomorrow morning in earnest, right at 8:30, 8 o'clock or 8:30? My GS is going to kill me. 8:30 with UCJCI leading Bible study and worship tomorrow. But for now, I want to welcome you again into the church I grew up in, and to say a couple of things. The ladies have said that there are a number of sandwiches that will be left in the hall, so if after we finish here and you'd like to grab some more, just pop over there and all will be well. There's that. A reminder, please, tomorrow we want this GA to go, it's paperless, so please have a tablet, a computer, something. There will be electrical cords under your tables. All delegates must be seated at one of the tables in the sanctuary. The sanctuary has been set up for the General Assembly now, and so you have to be seated at one of those tables. There will be rows of chairs behind the tables. There'll be a number of observers coming in over the course of the 2.5 days, but they will sit in those chairs. Your program outlines exactly what's going to be happening over the 2.5 days, so I'm not going to walk through that, but suffice to say that something important I was supposed to say. I can't remember what that was. Okay. When we started the concept the paper, and it was Colin and Phil Tanis and I. Colin, where are you? Oh. The question was, what would the theme of this General Assembly be? And it seemed like a no-brainer that on the heels of the General Council in 2025 October, that we would explore the same theme, Persevere in Your Witness, to prepare our own region for its engagement in that global space. And so hence, we accepted that theme. So tonight, we're going to call on Satri to really explore for us the theme of Persevere in Your Witness. And after that, I've invited 3 of our denominations, Reverend Eddie over there from RCA, Reverend Kieran Kilawan from PCTT, and Reverend Carmen Lansdowne from United Church of Canada, to respond to what they heard from Setri. When we've done that, I'd like to engage the rest of delegates in your reactions to what you heard. Okay, so we have a fulsome community engagement space. So Setri, I want to invite you up to do your presentation on that thematic exploration, and then invite Eddie, Kieran, and Carmen in that order to speak to the context of your church and what you heard, whether it resonates or it's different from the context that you sit in. All right? Thank you.
Once again, I want to add a voice of gratitude for the inspiring worship we had this afternoon as our global celebration of Reformation Sunday in Cayman Islands, in CANAAC. So I think my work has been made easier by the message that we had, and I do want to say thank you to our President Najla for that very inspiring message. Because the panorama of things covered and where she landed gives us the inroads into why and how and the urgency of persevering in our witness, which is our theme for the General Council and the theme for this CANAAC Assembly. I'm going to be just throwing a few ideas around on this theme. We'll have time tomorrow to actually look at what the General Council is and the mechanics of those in the orientation slot that has been put in the program. But for now, I'll just zero in directly on reflecting on this theme of persevere in your witness. It's based on many biblical passages, but for this evening, I just want to focus on one of those passages, and I'll refer to another one towards the end. That's the Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 passage. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. In the previous chapter, we were told, we were given a whole list of people that have been people of faith in their real circumstances. These were not people plucked out of a joyous, prosperous situation, and then we just have a list of people who we are told this is what it means to have faith. But people who were actually facing very difficult circumstances, people who were looking at what it means to be a person of faith in their contexts. And these were witnesses in their own times. And yet we were told that for the sake of the faith, for the sake of their witness, they went through challenging times, including some being persecuted and stoned to death and sawn in two, and we have a description of what it meant for them to be faithful people in their own times. Then the 12th chapter begins in the way I just read. Since we are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, we have a particular call to run our own race. The cloud of witnesses, as Reformed understand it, is not just those we can list historically. They include persons that we are with in our communities, persons who are in the margins in our communities, persons who struggle and whose lives remind us that the world in which we live have excluded some. In addition to that being the reality, we've also got new realities in our time. And the cloud of witnesses include those who are victims of wars that they did not create. I think some of what Najla pointed to this afternoon remind us starkly that we live in that kind of world. And if the whole world seems to be on the side of the mighty and the powerful, we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. What are we called upon to do? That's where the theme persevere in our witness comes. We also live in a time where there's cynicism about standing for the right. So much so that some are actually questioning those who stand for the right, even in our pews. Some are even in leadership in our churches who question the wisdom of standing for justice. We would rather, as described in Isaiah chapter 58, go by the rituals, what we know the church is called to do. We would rather ensure that our worship on Sundays remain that boat which is not rocked, remains that which we can point to and say, yes, we are following the tradition, even the Reformed tradition, rather than follow the one who calls on us to break the chains of injustice. With all these factors, it's easy to give up. It's easy to be discouraged. It's easy to wonder whether there can ever be a change. This year, as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Accra Confession, it is tempting to say 20 years. We should have seen some differences by now. But instead of the differences, we continue to see things get worse. This region has just gone through 2 devastating hurricanes, and yet there are many who do not know the consequences of climate change and climate injustice. And many would rather sit by and say, we are tired. It is in the middle of all these that we hear the call coming to us anew, not to be among the discouraged, not to be among the cynics, not to be among those who would rather just keep on the tradition, but rather be part of that community that hears, persevere in your witness. That witness that's led the people of whom we read today in Hebrews chapter 11 to stand firm in their own times. That witness that led Martin Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, and others to say, here we stand. That witness that led to the crafting of the Accra Confession 20 years ago. The work is not done yet. We are called upon to persevere in that witness. And the question is, how are we doing that in our region, in the CANAAC region? What are the issues around which we are reminded again this time around to persevere in our witness? Even if what we are called to do is not popular, we understand that the Lord of the church, whose first public message included coming so that those who are oppressed will be set free, is part of our calling. As we read the signs of our times, it's very important to recommit ourselves to persevering no matter how challenging it is. The other thing that informs us at this time, and especially it's historic because of what is happening in the Middle East today. In talking about perseverance, we are inspired by the interpretation that our Palestinian sisters and brothers have given to the word sumud. Sumud is that concept which we have learned from Palestinian people over the last decades and can be a helpful lens through which we can look at our perseverance. Sumud translates into steadfastness, resilience, and perseverance. These three together. And yes, as our hearts bleed for what's happening in the Middle East today, we are also inspired by the fact that there are people who continue to work alongside resilience in the face of much challenge. Sumud is anchored in the strive of oppressed people to a cause of justice and of historical rootedness in the land. And if that land has seen suffering and persecution and injustice, Sumud acts as a counterforce to injustice, providing people and communities with the strength to confront oppression. Sumud is what makes those who have been at the receiving end of the economic injustice that has characterized our world, of the racial injustice, of the gender injustice, of the kinds of injustice that the world has experienced. Sumud is what those who are at the receiving end of this injustice have stood by to be resilient. So that when we are called upon today to persevere in our witness, it's not necessarily being the ones outside the challenge to speak into the challenge, but rather we need to be more humble than that. Being ready to learn from those who have been in those situations of oppression and yet teach us resilience, teach us what it truly means to persevere. And so it is my prayer that as we delve into this theme, that we know that our teachers include, or in fact should be led by, those who are in the margins. Include those who have taught us what being resilient and not being tired means. It is in this setting that the Hebrew writer, the writer of the book of Hebrews, challenges us to persevere in that witness, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of that faith, who himself was crucified because he was different, because he came for the sake of those who did not have life to have life. And if we are his followers, what does it mean for us today? I want to end on the note of another passage. And this one I will not read, I'll just summarize that passage as it comes to us from Revelation chapter 2. The first church that the message to the 7 churches addressed. Each of these 7 churches has some critical remarks, and they also have some affirming remarks. But this first church had in their affirming remarks the fact that they persevered. And the question is, if we should have that kind of report card, will we be among those who are told we are persevering in our own times? As I said at the beginning, I share these few thoughts, not as an end in itself, because I know there are going to be responses to it, but as things to provoke us to keep on reflecting on this theme, persevere in your witness. And I look forward to how our conversations around these will go, and look forward to the responses that will come right now, leading us into our discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Setri, for sharing that important message and explaining the theme for the assembly of the WCRC next year and the assembly this time. And thank you, Angela, for inviting me to give a brief response. I know that I have 7 minutes, so I gotta go quickly. The Reformed Church in America will be celebrating 400 years in 4 years. So we have been around since 1628. We began as a Dutch Reformed church when Dutch immigrants came and landed in what used to be called New Amsterdam. Then the English came and changed the name to New York. But we have been in ministry since 1628. So throughout our 400 years of history, we have seen God at work in mighty ways. God has done a beautiful thing, and we continue to transform. We continue to change. We continue to evolve. We continue to try to be faithful in our witness to the ministries over all this time. I have been serving for the last 6.5 years. I cannot believe that it's been 6.5 years since I began my work in the Reformed Church in America as General Secretary. And the theme of persevering in our witness connects really well to our own context. I think we are in the process of restructuring. In that process of restructuring our denomination, because we, similar to what Ian was saying yesterday, where we have our structure was for a lot of members in churches, but over the years we have been shrinking, and because of the challenging conversations that have been going on in North America, specifically around the people that you are mentioning, people on the margins, the LGBTQ community and immigrants and refugees and all of that. So that has been a challenge for us. So we are persevering in our witness through a process of restructuring. The General Synod in June of this year, we approved that recommendation that called the church to reimagine our structure, reimagine how we do ministry. Historically, in the Reformed Church, we had 4 layers of leadership. You know, the local congregation, there's a consistory, and then we had a classis, we had a regional synod, and then the general synod. So general synod in form task force that I was working with, and we called the restructuring team. And the question was, how do we continue to do ministry together? And one of the questions was also the LGBTQI conversation. How is that going to be? You know, how are we as a denomination going to address that conversation? It was surprising for so many people that the restructuring team brought back a recommendation that did not include any change in the reality of the LGBTQI conversation. Our synod decided that will be a local decision of every classis. So, and we're saying, okay, because of where we are, we want to be a big tent. When when we are a big tent, that means that, we like to see people connected with us. So that means that some of our classes will be, more on the progressive side, and they will perform, they will ordain members of the LGBTQI community. They will allow some of the churches perform same-sex marriages, but some classes will not do that because of their conscience, because how they read the Bible. And we have decided to say, okay, we will stay in what we call the messy middle. And one of the pieces that we're talking about in my report is the calling of John, John chapter 13 and 14, when John talks about loving one another. And I was sharing in June in my report that, what we read in the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels, the Jesus of the Synoptic Gospel, when we talk about loving our neighbors and loving God, the Jesus of the Synoptic Gospel is making an explanation of the Old Testament. That's what we see. But the Johannine Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospel of John is saying, I'm going to give you a new commandment. This is new. Because, living in a big tent requires a lot of humility. It requires to love one another, because love is both ways, I love you and you love me. And love doesn't mean that we're going to agree in everything. It means that we are going to live together. It means that we're not going to judge each other. It means that, that we are going to, follow Jesus and be faithful in that calling of Jesus. So we're going through a process of restructuring. Also, that report that General Synod decided to focus is that we in the Reformed Church in America, we're going to focus on disciple making. We're going to make disciples who make disciples. So we're not going to focus on a lot of who's wrong and who's right about reading the Bible, but we're going to focus on being that group of disciples that love each other. Again, in the Gospel of John says, how does the world see that we are the disciples of Jesus? When we love one another. The loving one another piece is a really important piece as we continue to do the work of mission as we continue forward. And finally, we're going to we're going to persevering in our witness through a ministry that emphasizes, church revitalization and church planting. So we had a lot of churches in our denomination that are small, a lot of our churches that need that needs support and help. As we continue into the future, we're going to focus on that, and that's how we're going to to do our best to persevere in the witness of the Lord. So going back to what you were saying, Cetri, I think that connects really well with the theme of persevering in our witness. We're going to, my hope is that when we gather together, we will not continue to talk about things that divide us. We're not going to continue to talk about excluding people. We're not going to continue to talk about that. We will focus on how do we become faithful followers of Jesus who invest our time, our energy, making disciples that will also make disciples as they continue into the future. Thank you.
So as we pause and prep for this little presentation, I'd like us to do one little thing. It's something that we'll be talking about in our presentation, but I'd like you to just take a deep breath in, breathe out. One more time, take a deep breath in, breathe out. It's a concept of understanding our health and persevering in a different way. So I'm taking this from a perspective that is unique. In 2023, our church decided to do our Lenten Journey booklet, which is available on the same theme, and the theme would have expressed a lot of what we would endure. And once we get to the slides, we'll figure this out. We designed, the presentation is designed on three primary dynamics, being that we are not just persevering in witness, we are looking at justice, we're looking at equality, and we're looking at values. But before we get to that, we're gonna go into a little brief understanding of the Presbyterian Church. So the Presbyterian Church, I'll keep talking while we get the slides up, right? The Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago is 156 years old. We're not that, coming after Eddie, we're not that long in historical existence. We are birthed from the Presbyterian Church of Canada, which is now the United Church of Canada. And that structure will be rooted in our dynamic. We have 107 churches, 72 primary schools, 5 secondary schools, 3 ECCE centers, and 1 tertiary institution, which happens to be the oldest tertiary institution on the island. So we're very steeped in education. The PCTT is rooted in fighting issues of justice, equality, and shaping values through education. And historically, we are pivotal in the democracy within the political world of Trinidad and Tobago. And we are pivotal in the founding and functioning of the Interreligious Organization of Trinidad and Tobago. That, if we go to the one with the big little circle, that's where that's from. We'll get that. Post-pandemic, I'm taking this from a post-pandemic point, and in that dynamic, we are still striving and currently placing a lot more effort into the pastoral care dynamic because we have some fallout within the concept of returning to church. Within justice, we're going to look at a unique dynamic. We have seen in our witness a span to care for ethnically different personalities. The church is historically given, rooted in the East Indian community of Trinidad and Tobago, but now we have partnered with the vulnerable Venezuelan refugees on the island. We have assisted and partnered with the Roman Catholic Church, and we continue to do so to delve into community-level care. We have worked with the government as well, because we do have that listening ear, who has only recently, and when I mean recently, September of this year, they have begun a slow rollout into the educational system of registered Venezuelan refugees. Now, this is something that we've been fighting for. It's been a difficult walk because we know when it comes to refugee work, it's not easy to get them into the educational systems. And that's one of the things that we are aiming to. I will have to point out, though, that the Presbyterian schools are very strapped for space, and therefore it's very difficult for us to take on students. We're only taking on a few when the Roman Catholic Church is taking on the large majority, and it's largely also due to the fact that the majority of the Venezuelan refugees are Roman Catholic. So we're looking at that kind of dynamic in our church. We have called on our own owners of companies, wonderful. So we're looking for justice, right? Just go to the justice, let's keep going up, good, we can stop right there. So we have called on all our companies and owners of companies to, under the dynamic of the Venezuelan community, to use proper financial processes when hiring refugees, because we've had a situation on the island when those workers were not treated with the care and the honor of the work that they do. And that's one of the issues we continue to plug when it comes to justice. Our BOSR and Sold Out Servants, which is a youth organization, have worked in the PCTT to share items, not just as school supplies and food items, but actually aid in constructing homes for those who have found themselves on the streets or vulnerable to the elements in these times. When we turn to equality as my second bracket when it comes to perseverance, the PCTT is prized, and we're prized to have been one of the first major churches to allow church leadership at the highest level. Before our current moderator, we had 12 years of female leadership of the church, telling ourselves that we have now come to that point. I'm currently the lead in I'm the principal of the Theological Institute, and for every one male that comes into the institute, there are 2 females that come in to learn. So very soon, you're going to see a larger female clergy in our church rather than male. And that's something that we have prized ourselves in that regard. There's been a lot of conversation with our youth in relation to matters of gender justice. We are still talking about it. It's a slow walk, I will be honest, because as a Caribbean country, and I think we share this with many of our Caribbean colleagues, the issue of gender justice is a slow walk. It's a very slow walk, and it's a trepidous walk that we have to tread carefully with. So in that instance, we are still talking and aiming for more discussions, not wanting to create a divide, but simply be a welcoming community. Our historical need, next slide, for church workers is another dynamic that speaks to equality. And I know it's not foreign to our church alone, because in Persevering, we have 24 pastoral regions, 3 to 6 churches per region, and that means, and we only have 17 full-time ministers. So some ministers, Reverend Sanya being one of them, have actually manned up to 10 churches. And we have a situation where in those instances, we are strapped for workers or ministers. We have therefore brought on contractual retired workers because we needed the assistance. We have further required the efforts of our deaconesses, or female workers who specialize in children and women's work, to assist in a very greater high level. And to aid, we have done something a bit unique, and I know it's not entirely Presbyterian, but we have created a position called the presiding elder. It's a lay leadership that has arisen from the regions and from the points, and now we have twice as many presiding elders as ministers. And presiding elders are like lay pastors, but the unique difference is they can actually administer the sacraments. It's helping in the need. It's helping with supply. And I know it's funny because they don't wear a collar, but we are the priesthood of believers. Values and mental health. I know we're a different church, please excuse us. Values and mental health. Another aspect of our fight is anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, bullying, aggressive behavior, and workplace mental health issues have become rampant post-pandemic. It's become so bad that we have had to institute new systems within the church for mental health and values education. In 2023, we launched the church's first mental health wholeness unit, Bet Rafa Mission, which has become an umbrella organization assisting not only church members, but societies at large. We have a hotline that they can call into, and many people are seeking that. They're not just from the church, they're coming from the school systems, they're coming from other religious institutions, and it's burgeoning to become something very weighted. We've begun working with our schools with an anti-bullying booklet since 2007, and it has finally been given traction by the Ministry of Education this year because of bullying issues within the school system. We have also, only this year, gotten another one of our publications, the Values for Life project, under the school system again, because they have noticed in our school systems, we have a lower level of bullying and activities of anger, but the other schools do not, and therefore they have asked us as a church to persevere in the societal government schools, which we are doing, and we are aiming to push those dynamics. I have a picture with the 3 books available, and if anybody wants copies of 1 or 2, just contact me, we'll get them to you. There are books that we are available to share with those who are educationally based. So again, I have taken the opportunity to look at perseverance through a post-pandemic line, looking at witness through justice, equality, and values through mental health. Thank you.
All right, last speaker of the evening, yeah? You can persevere in listening to my witness. So in preparing to speak on the theme of our General Assembly, the following 3 ideas came to me that I was reflecting on the question, what must we persevere through? I was reflecting on the issues of witness and testimony, and what does respectful witness look like in an age of repentance in Canada? And then reflecting on the need to be rooted in confessions and assurance of pardon, which is connected to that second point. So coming from the United Church of Canada, I want to share a little bit about our context. I think it was shared this morning in worship at South Sound, but maybe not necessarily in this group. I can't remember. Time is meaningless 2 years into being moderator of my church. But I'm the first Indigenous woman to serve as moderator of the United Church of Canada, and only the second ever Indigenous person. So in May of 2023, Broadview magazine wrote a story about the latest Pew Research Center statistics stating that Canada's largest Protestant denomination, that's us, is shrinking the fastest. The latest census paints a grim picture of the United Church of Canada, which lost a whopping 40% of affiliates between 2011 and 2021, falling to 1.2 million people from roughly 2 million. Affiliates are people who self-describe in the census as having a United Church identity, but they may never go to church. In the same 10-year time period, the United Church tracked membership dropping from about 480,000 to roughly 350,000 people, and church attendance declining from over 165,000 to under 120,000 people. So the narrative of decline that has already come up in our assembly together is alive and well in our communities of faith, as well as in the broader public. Many of you will have heard that Canada went through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission process. Between 2007 and 2015, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement compelled the Government of Canada to provide more than $72 million to support the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work. The TRC spent 6 years traveling to all parts of Canada and heard from more than 6,500 witnesses. The TRC also hosted 7 national events across Canada to engage the Canadian public, educate people about the history and legacy of the residential school system, and to share and honor the experiences of former students and their families. It was a national legal policy that children who are legally considered to be Indigenous in Canada must attend residential schools, and the unofficial policy, and something that was penned by one of the previous ministers of Indian Affairs, was to kill the Indian in the child. Part of the testimony of the TRC hearings included survivors sharing that they believed that there were unmarked burials at sites of these so-called schools all across the country. Commissioner Murray Sinclair said at one point he wouldn't be surprised if there are as many as 25,000 unmarked graves across the country, a significantly higher number than the 2,800 deaths confirmed as part of the TRC process. In June of 2021, the report of 215 potential burial sites at one single school rocked the country, and with the help of ground-penetrating radar, individual communities have identified potential grave sites numbering more than 10,000 across the country, with only a fraction of the residential schools having engaged in any ground-penetrating radar. To be clear, due to a host of legal and cultural constraints, there have been no exhumation of bodies to date, and many communities, along with survivor families, struggle with how to best proceed in a trauma-informed way and with care and paying attention to our cultural protocols, which are very diverse across the country. As a denomination that was engaged in the running of these so-called institutions, or schools, the United Church of Canada has been an open and willing partner to the Office of the Special Interlocutor on Unmarked Burials over the last 2 years, as an examination of this issue has happened. Institutionally, we set aside an initial $200,000 for each of the 15 schools that we operated. The funding provided is provided should communities wish it, making funds available to support the work of identifying unmarked graves, in addition to provision of all relevant United Church archival records. As the granddaughter of a residential school survivor, I have been grateful for the approach that our church takes in trust-based granting, culturally sensitive methods of working, and also that as an Indigenous woman and granddaughter of a survivor, that I'm never asked to speak on behalf of the church on this issue as we continue to be accountable for our history. The one exception that I made was the first national gathering on unmarked burials in September of 2022. They asked the Office of the Moderator to give an official response to the proceedings of their first event. And I claimed that it was a difficult spot for me to be in because I was the granddaughter of a survivor. Our church's position is that I shouldn't have to speak about residential schools. And the reason I can stay Christian and Indigenous, and the reason I can serve the United Church of Canada, is because we are continually stepping forward and being accountable for this heinous history. In 2018, the United Church of Canada restructured. There was no segue there. I'll leave aside that hard context of what's happening in Canada and in our church, just to say that I'm proud of our church and the approach that we're taking. So in 2018, the United Church of Canada restructured, leaving behind some of its Presbyterian tradition and eliminated presbyteries. After the restructuring, and because our general council offices and their annual financial budgets depend on the financial well-being of our congregations, Our General Secretary and the General Council Executive engaged in a strategic planning process, which included defining a new call and vision of the church. Our vision is that, called by God as disciples of Jesus, the United Church of Canada seeks to be a bold, connected, evolving church of diverse, courageous, hope-filled communities united in deep spirituality, inspiring worship, and daring justice. As a result of that vision, we articulated a new call to the church, to be a church of deep spirituality, bold discipleship, and daring justice. I love this new call and vision. As stated, they feel broad enough to cover the diversity of United Church communities of faith from coast to coast to coast in Canada, because we also include the North Coast, which is our biggest coastline, while still representing the heart of who we are. My hope is that at the congregational level, churches will discern how their own ministries can be an expression of this call and vision. In terms of the work of our institutional church at the national level, the strategic plan landed on 6 strategic objectives that help us to determine what is the highest and best use of our increasingly limited resources, both financial and personnel. Our strategic objectives are to embolden justice, collaborating to mend the world, to mend church and world, to invigorate leadership, adapting and innovating for bold discipleship, to nurture the common good, creating equity and sustainability in resources. As Canada urbanizes and most of our rural churches have a harder and harder time calling ministry personnel, we're noticing there's a very urban-rural split between the churches that are resourced and the churches that are not. And the churches that are in urban centers have won the real estate lottery in many respects. To deepen climate integrity, living into our climate commitments, including the commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030. And we are not there yet, but many, many congregations are working to retrofit their buildings. In Canada, 65% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from heating and cooling buildings. And then growth, to strengthen invitation, holding humility and confidence in sharing our faith. And lastly, journeying Indigenous pathways, forging right relations between the church and Indigenous peoples, and between the non-Indigenous church and the Indigenous church. I have watched the church struggle into this new way of being. And of course, it feels difficult to say that things we've done for decades are no longer the right things for us to be doing, or no longer things that we can do. And I trust the discernment and collective wisdom that went into developing these strategic objectives, that they will add capacity and maintain relationships in important ways going into the future. Of course, there's a lot more I could say if I had more than 7 minutes, but the questions I've been reflecting on as I try and summarize what is happening in our context and what it means to persevere in our witnesses. What does respectful witness look like in an age of repentance? It's enough for me to say, as an Indigenous woman and pastor, that I can stay Indigenous and Christian because XYZ things, all these things that we've done, increasingly better over the last 40 years. But I have just, tens and hundreds of cousins who have completely rejected the church. And that has to be okay, because what the church and what the government did to our aunties and our uncles and our elder siblings and our grandparents was horrific. But what does it look like for me in the context of that difficult, horrendous history to be able to proclaim God's good news, not just inside the walls of our church, but to the world, and to say that the church still has meaning and can still inspire transformation? How do we strengthen invitation when people are ashamed of our history? What does it mean to consider Christian mission when the history of Christian missionaries in our church caused so much harm? I'm teaching a class at Union Theological Seminary in New York this fall. It was an accident. It just sort of happened. And one of my students who comes from Puerto Rico had said, moderator, how can you be Indigenous and Christian? And I've been struggling with how to answer him. And a couple of weeks ago, I curled up in my daughter's bed as she was getting ready for sleep, and she always pulls out the big questions at bedtime. It's like she finally feels settled enough, and it's like, oh, good, mom's here and she's present, so I'll say, why do you think it is that the federal bank, like she explained to me one night at bedtime how the Fed worked in the US, like the Federal Reserve. And so she says, like, how, so, like, if people are using the Bible to hurt other people, then why are we Christian? And I thought back to hearing Nadia Bolz-Weber, a Lutheran public theologian in the US, preaching at the Evolving Faith Conference last year in Minneapolis, and her talking about trying to nail down the meaning of a parable was like trying to nail Jell-O to a tree. And that the purpose of the parables were not that they were some tidy story with a moral lesson tacked on to the end, but rather that our scriptures are endless sources of timeless wisdom, but they require us to rumble with them. And so I said, there's lots of things in the Bible that are hard, and there are lots of things that are in the Bible that people have used to hurt each other. And the purpose of keeping these scriptures in the form that we've used them for the last 2,000 years is that we continue to discern what is the good and how can we be our best. And if we believe in a living God, that there is the possibility to discern what is the transformative power of the Gospels in our scriptures. And I said, taking religion out of the question does not eliminate oppression. So if I had to choose to be part of a community of people who are rumbling with this tradition of how do we believe we can do better in this world that God created, if I want to do that by myself or in a community of other seekers who believe in the liberative power of the gospel, I'm choosing not to do it by myself. And so for me, and I think for our church, that's the good news of our faith. And that it's through this confession of our human failings that we can be assured of God's goodness. And so faced with whether or not to persevere, we say yes.
I just said to Carmen, I don't know what to say. What we've heard from 3 denominations is what hard spaces feel like, what difficult questions feel like, and how those questions have even in the big tent, have no real answers, but we struggle. But one of the things that all 3 of the denominations talked about was the hope at disciple making, the hope at looking through at the services that can be provided when you look at PCTT, and the aggressiveness, and I want to use that word thoughtfully, aggressiveness with which you're seeking to engage at the local level. And then for you, Carmen, the journeying of the church. And I raise my hand, I'm a Canadian, so I've attached myself to really journeying with what happened at those residential schools. I'm not an Indigenous person like you are, but I really wanted to understand. And to be in the presence of a granddaughter of one of those people is humbling for me. The incomprehensible nature of it, but in spite of that you speak to, in spite of all of that, I choose God. And that's the hope. That's the hope in every one of these. So when we talk about persevere in your witness, we must go beyond all that is wrong and all that is difficult and all that how did Eddie put it? We have to agree to disagree, and we have to find the things that we agree on and come together. But we have to remember that in all of that, there's the amazing hope. And how will we engage with it? And how will we answer the young child so that that young child finds the energy to go forward? So I don't know if anyone wants to I mean, I'm overwhelmed personally. I don't, anyone wants to make a comment or anything. If so, we maybe have one or two of those. It is that magic hour. But I want to thank the three presenters, because you have established a platform on which this General Assembly, when we step off tomorrow morning, can really move in with depth. And as we come into tomorrow, you will, let me forget about Sunday and come to Monday. You will be leaving the hotel at 7:30 on the dot. So please be in the lobby. Please, everyone accounted for, in order to get to Savannah and be seated, because we want this General Assembly to run on time. So the start right at 8:30, and UCJCI will be leading worship, followed by the immersion experiences. And overnight, tonight, those will go up on the website, so you'll see which experiences we've been able to slot you in. And for and as well, around lunchtime tomorrow, the three committees will also go up on the site, and there'll be notes for whoever's on the theological committee, because we've collected everything that was that I got, and Chelsea's got those all prepared, so be able to share that. Friends, it has been a long day. You've worshiped in congregations across the island and had various experiences. And now we have been able to formally open our General Assembly and to really begin the journey of engaging on the issues around persevering in the context of so much and holding the Accra Confession sacred as we do so. Before I say good night to you, I want to say farewell, safe travel to three people. Jehoon, really sorry you're going, but it is what it is. You got a big job. And then there's Kathy and Marie at the back from Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. And then there's Samuel from WCRC, one of the vice presidents. They'll be leaving us tomorrow at various times. But to say a sincere thank you for joining us, and that we have had a better experience for your presence. God bless each of you. The bus is already here, should be. The bus should be outside, and you travel back to the hotel, and then we start tomorrow morning at 8:30. Thank you very much.